Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Tufts Energy Conference. Today we explore an issue that has been on many people's minds this year, environmental justice, in the context of a dam building project in Pakistan. Environmental justice has been on the tip of everyone's tongues as it follows in the wake of the racial justice movements in the summer of 2020. As we witness the devastating effects that environmental injustices, from lack of access to water to polluted air, it is clear that just as systemic injustices in all walks of life disproportionately impact marginalized communities, environmental issues are no different.
We do not buy and sell the air. We do not buy and sell the water. We do not buy and sell the earth. We do not buy and sell the fire. Those are what the true powers of the earth are. They are not those sitting in the United Nations who are denying the rights of indigenous people.
Environmental justice is the idea that all people should be treated fairly, regardless of race, colour, national origin or income, and involved in the making of the environmental laws, regulations and policies that will affect them. This is true from the United States to Pakistan, and it is with a Pakistani activist, Torwali, that we sit down with today. Torwali has been advocating for the rights of his community members, an indigenous Pakistani group called Torwali, for whom Zubair is named. 10 years ago, the Pakistani government constructed the Torwali River Hydropower project in Bahrain, Swat, Pakistan, devastating the livelihoods of the surrounding community who depended on its waters, and who had done so for thousands of years. Hydropower is hardly a new controversy. From South America to Asia, hydropower projects have been displacing communities, impacting livelihoods and destroying habitats for almost a century. Even now, Turkey is planning the Ilisu Dam project, which will destroy a village which has been continuously inhabited for some 12,000 years, despite the protests of its inhabitants. High-profile cases, such as the 2019 Brumadinho dam disaster in Brazil and a 2018 dam collapse in Laos's southeast Champasak province, highlight the risk dams can present to downstream communities. When caution and monitoring are relaxed, it is locals, who are often not even benefiting from the hydropower generation, that may face death and displacement. Dialogue between the project planners, engineers, and impacted community members is a must. Previously touted as a renewable energy source, hydropower is now eliciting concerns about the amount of methane it emits as it destroys forests and carbon-capturing vegetation. Not so clean after all. Yet, hydropower is also one of the surest bets for reliable low-carbon energy. Last year, it produced a record 4,306 terawatt-hours, the single greatest contribution from a non-fossil fuel energy source. It may be critical to meeting the energy needs of countries worldwide. Some of the only economies to go fossil fuel-free have been those which rely on hydropower, like Costa Rica. Here is the clinch between the renewable energy transition we need with speed and a just transition which would respect the rights of the communities around it. Bahrain is a town located at the confluence of two rivers, the Dural and the Swat, in northern Pakistan. A tourist destination, the region is known for being incredibly beautiful, with lush foliage and waterfalls in the summer, as well as bitterly cold and isolated in the winter. Many of the people who inhabit the valley are of the local indigenous Torwali community, up to 150,000 people. Our guest today, Zubair, has been very critical of the Pakistani government's approach to hydropower projects and how the government, in its ostensible pursuit to address the acute energy shortage in the region, has marginalized the voices of the Torwali community.
What I really want from this conversation is to influence the policymakers in Pakistan to be more focused on the communities rather than on the larger development of entire Pakistan.
This is Zubair speaking, and if the audio isn't quite up to scratch, do forgive us. He is currently dialing in from Bahrain, Swat, Pakistan. He wants this conversation to be heard by policymakers because for so many there is so much focus on the development goals on paper. Meet 100% electricity access by 2030, double GDP per capita for the country in the next 10 years, that we forget about how pursuing these policies without involving local communities can lead to harmful outcomes.
My name is Zubair Torwali. I am a researcher, author, a social and human rights activist based in the Swat Valley in my home community, Bahrain, Swat.
What the wider world knows about Pakistan often isn't about its indigenous communities. When we hear the word indigenous, we often think of Latin American communities, particularly living deep in the Amazon or perhaps off in the Pacific Islands.
The indigenous community to which I belong is called Torwali. They have their own indigenous language, Torwali. The community is about 150,000 people in numbers.
Indigenous peoples are defined in part by their own understanding of themselves as Indigenous peoples, and then by certain qualities, historical and cultural, which might set them apart from the dominant groups in society. Often, they have lived on the land they have currently resided on since pre-settler times.
They have been living here for more than 5,000 years, long before the Christian era, and they share some customary laws regarding to their natural resources, division of their natural resources.
But by virtue of this separation from the dominant strands in society, they are often historically marginalized.
So there is a long history behind this marginalization. They are excluded from education because of the language barrier.
And exclusion from education means exclusion from other forms of livelihoods available to the rest of society. This makes Indigenous peoples even more reliant on the land and resources they have traditionally used. Which brings us to the Swat Valley in Pakistan and the dependence of the Torwali people on this river, from fishing and agriculture to tourism and small businesses. The people of Bahrain rely heavily on the Dural River and the surrounding valley for crop irrigation, firewood and tourism, which is why, when the Pakistani government announced a plan to build a hydropower project on the Dural River, the local community was highly concerned that the construction of the project would have severe effects on the local economy and standards of living.
So when we studied the initial resettlement plan of this project, and we learned that it was funded by Asian Development Fund. So we prepare a report on our findings, and which we shared with Asian Development Bank. And upon that report, the ADB sent an independent finding commission to this area again, and they found the project not feasible for the people, the project as harmful for the environment, for the economy, and for the agriculture, and for the habitat of the indigenous fish in the river. So they refused to fund the project. They withdrew from the project, but the government at that time, Pakistan was facing a huge challenge of energy crisis. So Pakistani government were hell-bent to build such projects.
For the Asian Development Bank to pull out of funding, there must have been systemic concerns. But the Pakistani government needed energy, and if that energy came at a cost, they were willing to pay for it. Paying for it, in this case, would have been addressing the needs of the Torwali community.
And they started a campaign to build the project. And we and the community in Bahrain, Swat, they opposed the design. They did not oppose the construction of the project. They opposed the design.
This is often how it goes. An initial plan, a resistant community, a community who protests perhaps not the project itself, but the way in which it is designed and implemented, particularly when it involves forced relocation or the loss or destruction of their resources. To meet this challenge, communities often attempt to negotiate, whether with a company or government, for compensation or shared benefits. But just because these negotiations take place doesn't mean that they're honoured.
And for 2 years, we were shuttled between the tribunal and the High Court, and there had been no decision on the project.
Meanwhile, Zubair told us, as they were fighting this out in court, the government was already constructing the project while making promises. Promises were made to different people, such as free or cheap energy access that would come from the project, or employment for the local people within the project, the building of a college, a water supply scheme for the town, some environmental protection measures, as the embankment was along the side of the river and so the natural beauty of the area was being destroyed.
More than 10 years has gone now past, and we didn't see any of these promises addressed. We don't have water in the river. And this creates problems for the local agriculture in the town, for the water supply to the homes in the town, for, the water mills which were running, and agriculture, the water for irrigation is not enough for the 9 months, excluding the three most peak months. The college has not been built yet. The water supply scheme has not been provided to the people in Bahrain. No jobs were given to the local community, local youth.
No water supply scheme, so no water outside peak seasons. It was clear that before the local people relied on the river for their livelihoods, and although very beautiful and a local tourist attraction, the government might respond that the reason this project was funded in the first place was to improve energy access and improve jobs, local development and economic growth in the region. Yet these very arguments have not been borne out in reality.
So we demanded from the government that it should provide free electricity from this project, or provide it on subsidized rate to the people so that they may use the energy for cooking, heating in their homes, and it will benefit the conservation of the forest in the area. Sadly, I say that energy is produced from a particular area. The energy is linked to the national grid. From the national grid, it is supplied to any people. There is no subsidized rate for the people of this particular area. This particular region doesn't have electricity in winter. And there we see electricity only for 2 hours in a day. In 24 hours, there is electricity only for 2 hours. So this is the situation, and for that we are very much concerned that we have these natural resources, water reservoirs, forest, everything, but still we are marginalized and our resources are used by other people, ignoring the people living on the margins.
Instead of receiving the energy for free, or even subsidized, the energy powered goes to the country as a whole. That means that the brunt of the energy toll is borne by people who still don't receive the benefits from the resources they used to rely on. Whether the rest of the country is benefiting from this change is up for debate, but as always, even when discussing critically needed renewable energy, we must ask, at what cost and to whom?
So that is one concern. The other is for jobs creation. They promised that they would give reference or jobs to the local community. Now, a few months back, there were 65 jobs announced, more than 65 jobs announced in the project, and none of this job is given to the local community because there are many political stakeholders that are involved.
So one of the problems is, of course, promises being made and not being kept. Now, there might be many reasons for that, some understandable, but that kind of logic wouldn't fly if we were talking about a contract between a government and a private institution. Which brings us to the next systemic problem. One of the major issues with these kinds of projects is the lack of consultation. But even when the consultation does occur, the power asymmetries between the business or governments on one side of the table and an indigenous community on the other means that there is very little transparency, little trust, and little traction.
The government has the power. The government has good lawyers. The government can control the courts.
This seems like an almost vicious cycle. The one path that might lead to a more equitable solution is already rigged. But there are some institutions trying to change that.
The international organizations such as World Bank, ADB, they are more sensitive towards the local communities. So when I look at the safeguard policies of these institutions, so they have their particular protocols for the indigenous communities as well for the local communities, and there are policies there. There should be clear-cut policies.
So what's the next step forward?
Now there are three big hydropower projects designed on the Swat River in our Torwali area, and these projects, when they are complete, so they will give energy of 700 megawatts electricity. So what we are trying to do that we never want to stop the government from building such projects. But what we want that there must be environmental compensation for the people. There must be social development from this project for the local people living in those particular area, and there must be damage control regarding these projects. These are our asks, our demands from the state of Pakistan.
The wider question that we're addressing when we talk about hydropower at the moment is whether it's worth the damages to the communities that it creates in their local area, when it can provide such important sources of energy access and tackling energy poverty. Communities who have been traditionally marginalised haven't been able to access education or employment opportunities, things that with increased energy we know are likely to improve. Given this context, what's the value of hydropower as a way of tackling energy poverty and energy access? Should this be a high priority? And if the government is responsible for meeting the energy needs of its citizens, what other ways should it be looking to do so? Now, first of all, of course, there are a panoply of other options out there: solar, wind, nuclear. Zubair cited these. But many of these come with the same concerns around community consultation, land rights, and environmental damage. So what else?
The government should not go for bigger projects. Bigger projects means bigger dams, bigger hydro projects, because those projects damage the local communities and local ecology immensely.
Here, Zubair is talking about small-scale hydropower, a potential option being explored in Asia and Africa. Small-scale hydro doesn't require a dam and relies on the natural running water of rivers and streams, and so has a much lower environmental impact. It also produces less energy and is currently cost-high and capital-intensive. But it could be an optimal solution for communities around the world to access local, renewable and green energy.
These projects, the small energy, hydro energy projects can be the best tools for the empowerment, economic empowerment of local people. But that is not happening.
New technologies are always on their way. Small-scale hydropower is out there. But this isn't a question of technology, which nifty new solutions might solve these problems, but rather one of design and implementation. Any one of the technologies we bring into this world has the capacity to increase inequity as well as to tackle it. What matters is how we choose to employ it. This episode was released as part of the Tufts Energy Conference 2021, with a nod to the Moving Forward with Hydropower panel. Come join us if you're interested. And thank you for joining us today with our guest Zubair Torwali. This episode was researched and written by Connor Cash and presented by me, Elizabeth Dykstra-McCarthy.